Good afternoon, everyone. The Sacramento City Council will please come to order. Would the clerk call the roll, please, so we may establish a quorum?
Thank you. Councilmember Laloe?
Here.
Councilmember Harris?
Here.
Councilmember Valenzuela?
Here.
Vice Mayor Chenier?
Here.
Councilmember Guerra?
Here.
Councilmember Jennings?
Here.
Councilmember Vang?
Here.
And I expect Mayor Pro Tem Ashby momentarily, and Mayor Steinberg.
I am here. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the City Council. I'd ask Councilmember Eric Guerra to please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you. Salute. Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, good afternoon to everyone. We've got a busy afternoon agenda, and then at 4 o'clock, so long as we get done with this meeting in time, we will have the Council's Budget and Audit Committee meet as we close in on a city budget. Let us begin with the consent calendar today. Do members have any questions about any item on the consent calendar? Any item you'd like to remove or discuss?
Yes, please, Mayor.
No, go ahead.
I'd like to remove item 5.
Item 5 for a separate discussion and vote?
Correct.
Okay, very good, thank you. Any other items? All right, do we have public testimony on the consent calendar, Madam Clerk?
I have no callers on the consent calendar.
Okay, I would take a motion then for items 1 through 15, absent item 5, which we're going to consider separately, please.
Mayor, I'll make the motion.
Moved by Councilmember Rick Jennings, and I heard a second. Second by Councilman Harris. Let's call the roll, please.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Ashby is absent. Councilmember Laloe?
Aye.
Councilmember Harris?
Aye.
Councilmember Valenzuela?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Chenier?
Aye.
Councilmember Guerra?
Aye.
Councilmember Jennings?
Aye.
Councilmember Vang?
Yes.
And Mayor Steinberg.
Yes. All right. Let's go back to the consent calendar passes. Let's go back to item 5. Councilmember Valenzuela.
Thank you, Mayor. I was struck when I read the staff item. There was a quote in there that said, this is regarding heavy-duty towing, which includes recreational vehicles, that over 60% of the recreational vehicles towed are occupied. That's something that we're expecting will increase as we're towing vehicles, essentially that are functioning as people's homes who are living in the streets. So something I have become aware of is obviously when your vehicle gets towed, that cost comes from somewhere. And in some cases, and what I've heard from staff, if you're unable to pay those costs, you basically lose the vehicle. And in this case, you lose your home because this is the vehicle you've been living in. So I wanted to ask staff, if there was any way for us, this is a funding provision, like we're allocating funding to these towing companies. Is there any way we could figure out a way to mitigate fees for towed vehicles that are occupied so people don't end up losing their homes if they're unable to pay those fees?
Who is prepared to answer that question? If not, I think this is an important enough subject to put the matter over for a week and have a further discussion about it, especially as we're establishing safe grounds for RVs and other vehicles. Well, let's see if we got a quick answer, and let's see how to proceed. Go ahead, Mr. Lemos.
Hello, Mayor. Peter Lemos, Code and Housing Enforcement Chief, Community Development. So currently, of course, for the last 14 months, we have not towed a occupied recreational vehicle. The vehicles we have towed, which are a total of 132 in the last 14 months, were hazards, burnt vehicles, or abandoned vehicles. Historically, when we're towing upwards of 300 vehicles, there was about 60% of those were occupied. So the vehicles would have to be posted to either, and they get 72 hours either to move the vehicle, abandon the vehicle, or get it operational. So those vehicles, of course, are towed, and then the owner, which about 80% of the time is not able to be even identified because the occupants of the vehicle don't own the vehicle. Those vehicles have to be, of course, picked up by the registered vehicle owner. So a majority of those are destroyed after the time because of the low value of the vehicle. As we move forward after pandemic and going back to the next process, we have to look at, what do we do with vehicles that are occupied? And that's a meeting that we're going to be having in the near future of how we're going to address a lot of the camps, unsheltered and things like that as the health order lifts. How do we do with, not only recreational vehicles, but automobiles? So the current process is just we post the vehicles to make them operational, remove them, or release them.
Yeah, I think, Mayor, I would love, and sorry, leaf blower just showed up, so hopefully you can still hear me okay. So I would love to put this over. I think especially given the bigger conversation that Peter just alluded to, I think this is something we should look at because it might affect our contracts with these providers and how we manage that moving forward, especially from a budget spending perspective. So,
All right.
That would be my motion, I guess, would be to delay this item pending those conversations.
I'll second that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Let's continue. I think it's appropriate. I think it's worth a longer discussion here. So let's call the roll, please.
Thank you. Councilmember Laloe,
Aye.
Councilmember Harris,
Aye.
Councilmember Valenzuela,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Chenier,
Aye.
Councilmember Guerra,
Aye.
Councilmember Jennings,
Aye.
Councilmember Vang,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Ashby is absent. Mayor Steinberg.
Yes. All right, we'll continue this and we'll work it out with the staff and council member to figure out the date. I don't know if this needs to get done within the budget context, but it raises some very important questions and I think worthy of a separate discussion. Thank you. All right, let us move to the discussion calendar. We do have three important items. And the first is a status report on the Creative Edge cultural plan. Megan Van Voorhees is here, who is our new arts leader in the city, hailing from Cleveland, Ohio, with a rich history of leadership in this very important and growing part of our city's economic and cultural future. And as you know, members, we decided to put $20 million or so of our CARES funding into the creative economy and into tourism in the midst of the pandemic, I think is a symbol and a signal of just how important we believe this sector is to the future of our city. So I want to welcome Megan. I hope all of you have had the opportunity to meet her. She's certainly outgoing and I know is out there in the community and meeting lots of people. And I want to turn it over to you to report on the progress of our Creative Edge plan and give us some of your thoughts and ideas about how we elevate these sets of issues.
Well, Mayor and members of council, thanks for creating an opportunity for me to come and speak with you today. This will be my first presentation to council and hopefully not my last, depending upon how it goes. If you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen here and get us going. There we go. I think we should be moving along just fine. I wanted to start by asking you all to think back to a couple of weeks ago at your council meeting when you honored 2021 National Youth Poet Laureate Alexandra Wien. It was quite an emotional moment in the meeting. And what I wanted to say was, what if I told you that the same iterative process that led to that wonderful poem you heard last week, or 2 weeks ago, in fact, could help someone heal from trauma or help a young person establish a growth mindset? What if I told you that those same skills of prototyping and iterating that are such a natural part of the creative process could be the foundation of an innovation economy, a vehicle for reviving troubled corridors, or a means for combating the critical public health issues arising from social isolation? So often, the paradigms that we operate under shape the benefits we're able to realize from our investments. And the truth is that the arts doesn't only equal entertainment. It's so much more than that. And there's a huge body of evidence that supports a wider understanding of the role creativity plays in our lives and communities. And you can see some of that here. I could probably do separate presentations on each one of these topics. But for today, the goal is really to talk about Creative Edge, and that perhaps the true essence of the Creative Edge plan was to unlock the potential of Sacramento's creativity to advance individual and community well-being. The 6 goals of the plan then hold us accountable to realizing that promise. But we can't talk about that until we talk about the realities of this. Never have we needed our creative sector more, and yet never has the sector been more vulnerable. Going into the pandemic, the creative industries were responsible for 23,000 jobs here and 1.2 billion in associated earnings. Approximately half of that employment was driven by independent workers, and overnight, everything was shut down and jobs dried up. The average total financial loss per artist in the 7-county region, as reported in April, we did a survey of the field on this, was $38,000. And nonprofit and creative businesses reported nearly $40 million in losses. May unemployment figures just recently released show that nationwide motion pictures and sound recording industries remain at 11.9% unemployment, while arts, entertainment, and recreation sits at 11.3%. And as the mayor mentioned, we discussed that you really did step in with a critical infusion of dollars to secure the future of Sacramento's creative economy. You can see some of the numbers here: 186 artists funded, 101 creative businesses, et cetera. But you also supplied much needed support to some of Sacramento's most vulnerable youth, providing mentorship, arts interventions, and mental health supports through the Healthy Heart and Mind Collaborative, a program that, because of your mid-year support, continued throughout the school year and will live on in the future. You helped seniors by sending them a hug, manifesting as a piece of art from our city's youth around the holidays, at a time when many already feel alone, made worse by the pandemic, gave a lift to those in need. And you supported projects that put artists to work in service to our community. I visited one of them just this morning, Studio T Arts and Entertainment. Some of you might be familiar with them. I saw today a podcasting booth, an editing suite, a maker space for merchandise, and studio space for filming. And these youth were learning their craft, teaching it, and getting paid. While there were many stories I heard this morning from T, one in particular was emblematic of what's going on through this creative workforce development program. There was a widely recognized hip hop icon, probably in his 60s, who really shaped a mainstream understanding of what hip hop is. He was grounded by the pandemic, unable to tour in the way that he normally was, and was, feeling much of the mental pressures that many have during this pandemic, and also economically. And those youth, they stepped in to help him out. They put his work online and created a revenue stream for him. Those skills that they're learning, they're putting back into their communities, creating content for their community members and supporting their community businesses. Those kids using their creative skills to give back to their elders. So facilitating the recovery of this sector in order to realize its full potential requires focus, discipline, alignment, and partnership. And when I got here, one of the main questions I asked was, what is our role now as the Office of Arts and Culture, as a part of the city, in a different kind of way? Where can we make the biggest impact? We landed on these 5 things: information that helps people make decisions about their engagement with arts and culture, whether they're looking to find an event or whether they're thinking about the role of the creative economy in their communities and what they do with that. Workforce development, really growing the capacity of the field to deliver on this promise. Investment, which you've long known us for, which is grants and public art, but which could actually be innovative forms of financing for these activities, like social impact bonds or perhaps other forms of public financing. Law, legislation, and policy. Well, we know that's your purview, not ours, but we certainly know that we have a role to play in influencing the climate for creative vitality here. And in partnership with you, we can do some things to make that climate stronger. And then convening and coordination, bringing together people from the field, bringing together people from other departments, bringing together arts with philanthropy, with government, with the civic space, all of that. So we applied these sort of core competencies to those 6 goals of the Creative Edge plan that you adopted years ago. And our strategy, which is supported through the city manager's recommended budget, reflects this focus directed towards each goal of the plan. I want to walk through those just real briefly. So the first one is to provide arts education, and something that I think, with some of those examples that you've already seen so far in this presentation will help you understand how impactful that can be. But we're going to shift our approach. We've had some great partnerships around the Healthy Heart and Mind Collaborative, and we're very excited to be able to continue what that partnership could look like around Any Given Child. Actually, it's a city program that we've had for a long time, but really shift our focus to a systems level where we think we can make a bigger impact. Through the Art Look project in conjunction with the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, it's going to allow us to understand the full picture of arts offerings by the schools and the school district and by community partners. So the idea is that we can focus our resources toward achieving greater equity in arts education. If we know who has and if we know who has not, we can be better positioned to both inform everyone and make more strategic decisions about where resources need to be devoted. We're planning to spend some time really looking at education and training of the field, looking at the workforce capacity. We anticipate that Any Given Child will have more needs, and the Healthy Heart and Mind Collaborative will have more needs for teaching artists. And we need to be able to supply that need with a qualified set of teaching artists moving forward. And we think we're in a good position to continue in that role. And then more broadly, beginning to look at career pathway development in the arts. There's a lot, arts and creative economy, there's a lot of opportunity there. And we've only scratched the surface. If we want to build a creative economy, we want to make sure that the creative economy that we're building, that the youth in our community have access to be a part of it moving forward. So what can we do to make sure that we're engaging them? On race and cultural equity, this is a really important part of the plan. It means that those youth have to have people that look like them to look up to. And that means us supporting organizations that are led by, accountable to, and predominantly serve people of color. Through the last allocation of resources, you devoted some funds that allowed us to establish the Cultural Equity Investment Program for a few of those organizations. This would allow us to expand that program to support those 3 organizations, which included Studio T Arts and Entertainment, as well as IMBA and also Sojourner Truth Museum, but also expand other organizations as well, provide mentorship, which we know is so powerful in terms of growing these businesses, while also providing racial equity training for the field. We think that there's a gap there, and there's an important need as we're all learning that we can do better. We can do better. And the more that we know, the better positioned we are to do better on this in the creative economy. And then holding ourselves accountable through racial equity audit. How are we doing? What do the numbers say? Equity is achieved when the outcomes don't differ based on race. And the reality is that that's true in terms of the investments we're making as an office. On the creative economy front, we know that we need to make investments in the nonprofit organizations that are competitive advantage for our region, while also conducting important research to understand the specific strengths of our creative economy and the pathways to those opportunities. And I'm going to pause here just for an example. Before I arrived in Sacramento, I was looking at some of the data on occupations here. And one of the things that I noticed was that we actually had a moderate competitive advantage on animation. So when I got here and was starting to talk with Jennifer West, our film commissioner, I started to unpack that. Tell me more about it. She said, well, have you ever heard of Sean Sullivan? I said, no. She said, well, Disney has recognized him as one of the premier animation instructors in the world, in fact, and he's right here. We actually funded him, or you funded him through another program through workforce development. Props here to my colleague, Christina Pallone, to actually take his program in animation education for high schools and teach teachers throughout Sac City and beyond how to execute on that curriculum. The reality is there's lots of opportunity in animation, everything from virtual effects to gaming to transitions in terms of biomedical illustration to just feature films themselves. And so there's a lot of opportunity for us. You start with your assets. It's certainly an asset for us. And that's the type of analysis that we're hoping to be able to do, is really to unpack, leverage, get a better understanding of what's happening, and begin to look at the climate and say, how are we supporting this thing that is an asset that could be so much more for us? And then I'll lastly say this, artists and neighborhoods. We know that the fate of artists in our neighborhoods is tied Our strategy here would prioritize grants for grassroots neighborhood level projects. In many conversations that I had with council folks, and even in the 9 months since I've been here, I've noticed a lot of need from PBIDs who have creative projects that just need resources to be able to do it along strategic corridors, need for smaller community-based organizations to carry out work, and artists. So this will give us an opportunity to be able to fund that work. There's clearly an appetite for creativity at the neighborhood level that needs to be filled. Simultaneously, though, we know that we need to focus resources towards examining the issues and the opportunities to develop more artist housing and space, and look at arts districts and clusters. And so some of the support would actually allow us to be able to do that. I've had good conversations with my colleagues in planning and housing and economic development, and there's a lot of people that are excited and also see the potential here, and I'm excited to work with them to move that forward. The general plan calls for, or the housing element specifically calls out the potential of community ownership as an opportunity, and how are we going to facilitate that? Artists are often pushed out of neighborhoods where they're creating value, but that value gets extracted by others. Can we do something here to serve them as a pilot that then we could extend to others as we're looking to advance that objective? We think there's opportunity for artists, and so professional development would be a part of this work as well. I started this presentation by asking you to think back to the council meeting just 2 weeks ago. And I wanted to just give Alexandra the last word here. She said in an interview with KCRA, "Poetry gave me the tools to tell my story in my own terms. It taught me that there is inherent value to everyone's lived experiences. So while poetry taught me how to speak up, it also taught me how to listen. And when we listen, we build empathy. And with empathy comes interminable energy to enact change." It's really hard to follow that. But I'll say one thing. If we play our cards right, the system that produced her can lead to the creation of thousands of others, poised to build a creative economy, support the growth of their communities and their families, and to more broadly lead to individual and community well-being. Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you if anyone has any questions.
Megan, thank you so much for a great presentation, including some specifics about how it is your department and the community would invest these dollars that are in the city manager's proposed budget. And I want to give a shout out to you, but I also want to give a shout out to the city manager, Howard Chan, because the truth of the matter is that I think historically, it's fair to say that arts and culture were maybe an afterthought when it came to the city budget. And in part because of the leadership of the city council, what we did with CARES, but also the manager's own sense of what makes a whole and healthy community, he affirmatively put $2.6 million in his recommended budget for your department and for our community. And I think that's a significant culture change. And what you're suggesting here in a appropriate and an enthusiastic way is that we need to build on that. And that's exactly what I know we intend to do. So I've got 3 members who have their hands raised. Do we have public testimony, Madam Clerk?
No, Mr. Mayor, I have no callers on this item.
Okay, then let's take my colleagues here. And again, I'm having a little trouble with here we go. I got Vice Mayor Chenier, Councilmember Valenzuela, and Councilmember Guerra.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I'll be brief. I just have a question. First of all, Megan, thank you. And really appreciate the framework that you've put together and how you're looking at this. I think it's very comprehensive and will serve us for the long term as we move forward and hopefully are able to put more funding into the different pieces. The only thing I wanted to add really is, and you know this because you attended some of our business meetings, the arts can play a huge role as we try to repopulate downtown and open up after the pandemic. And just, would love to get your thoughts on how the arts, and not necessarily all right now, but how the arts can be used to help us with those goals.
Yeah, I'd welcome the opportunity to talk about that more. I think you do have a creative talent base here, and I know that I've only scratched the surface of it in the 9 months, but the people are the foundation of a creative sector, and creating opportunities for those people to do their work, I think, is really important. And the climate does matter. I talked about the law, legislation, and policy piece, and Councilmember Chenier, you as you referred to us being in those conversations, one of the things that we heard loud and clear was, what does the relationship between the city and the sector really look like? And so, when people are making comments about, 40% of their budget for a community event has to go to security, what are we, when that event can actually be a contributor to safety in a neighborhood, how are we influencing that? So I think to the extent that we can have those kinds of conversations about how we can make it easier for creatives to be able to contribute, the more, the better. And I welcome the opportunity to have that conversation with you.
Great, thank you. I'll look forward to it.
Thank you, Councilmember Valenzuela.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. And I just want to say it's been a pleasure to get to know you and your team coming in. I'm excited about all we can do and all the ideas that you're bringing in here today. I do want to do a quick divergence on Vice Mayor Chenier's just point, because like one great example I've just became aware of from a nonprofit called Sac Valley Spark, working with regional transit, the board of which we're both on, to do art installations at the stops. And one of the ideas that I thought was really great is to have hire musicians or performing artists to be at the stops. And so it's both an incentive to get folks back on light rail and back downtown, but also a way to really activate those areas that have been just super under engaged. And I think is another great example of just what Megan's talking about in terms of creativity and just talent in our community, which makes me really excited about what we could get done as we reopen. But I do want to specifically ask, and you won't be surprised, Megan, about how we balance investments in like local talent versus outside of Sacramento talent. Sorry, I said that weird. And just get your thoughts. I know I brought it up a few times to you, and I know there's a lot of just ways to navigate that, but so much of what you're talking about, I think, has an implicit, and as I was listening to you, investing in the community we have here vibe to it, and how do we use this to really grow and develop and see all of those co-benefits. And so I'm just would be curious for some of your thoughts, and I know we'll keep talking about that. But
yeah, I think, one of the things I learned in Cleveland, I had benefited from a very robust community development sector, many of whom started out life as organizers and then at a later point professionalized. And one of the things that I learned from them really was this is an asset-based approach to community development. So when we think about that or apply that work to the arts or creative economy, then you put front and center what the assets are that you have in your community, and then begin to say, how can we better support them to be able to realize what they bring to the table? So Councilmember Valenzuela, yes, it's definitely on the radar screen for me. I remember that in a couple of meetings ago, or well, it's been a little while, but yes, absolutely. We want to make sure that we have the right set of opportunities and resources to meet the needs of the base that we have here. And I think that that's critical. And, when there's been much discussion about this, particularly in terms of procurement and some of the challenges associated with that. But I will note and follow up that I'm having a conversation with Mike Fry about that, and we'll definitely have more discussion. But, what can we do to make sure that the people that are here are adequately resourced to do the things that they're best at? And fundamentally, that's what should be a guiding principle in terms of our work. And I think that's definitely possible.
absolutely. And I really appreciate the ongoing conversations, and just want to lift up when you talked about the equity and funding distribution. That's definitely something I heard a lot about, specifically from artist organizations that represent communities of color, and thinking of what Councilmember Vang always talks about in terms of racial equity, impact assessments, and really looking at everything through that lens. Just appreciate the shift that you're looking to do there, and looking forward to continuing to engage in that. Thanks.
Well, and one learning I'll just add there in relationship to CARES funding is that a critical move was made to provide support both for individuals and creative businesses. And when you look at the demographics in the creative economy, that is critical from a diversity perspective, because you do have probably some of your greatest diversity sitting in your base of individual artists. And also some of those for-profit businesses, because that's the reality that they're living in. They can't afford. They really have to move this stuff forward. So
Very good. Thank you. Councilmember Guerra.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Megan. I think great work again on presenting a path forward and what we learned from the pandemic here. I think there was a great example of I think to your point about how we use art for more than just entertainment and art's sake. And I do want to thank both Alejandro in my office and Andrew Kehoe in the mayor's office and Commissioner Polo from our Cable Commission working together to hire artists to be our communicators and messengers and finding different ways to get information out. So many folks were pounded with different types of conflicting information that the normal government information wasn't even getting out to folks. So having artists that were working with our health partners to get out information helped us bridge that gap and get people who maybe almost became numb to the information be able to grab that when it came to COVID health, access to local places, and being creative, and also hiring many of our workers who were displaced who are artists. So I think that we learned a lot from the CARES Act usage and the fact that we use that as another way to get that information out. I want to go to the point about on equity as well. I agree with Councilmember Chenier and Councilmember Valenzuela about the activity and what we can do to hire local artists, and in particular in our central city and core. But I do want to encourage that we look at this as further for areas outside of the central city. There are so many activities that happen in the central city that benefit our businesses. But I'll bring up both the Latino Heritage Festival on Fruit Ridge, and then the Lunar Flower Fest and Tet Festival on Stockton Boulevard. Both of those are events that are geared to try to bring attention to the local businesses and help those businesses thrive. But it becomes almost cost prohibitive to even support those types of events. So I want to make sure that we're figuring out how do we expand and using art in those situations to have that dual usage outside also of the central city, that we're looking how do we strengthen those economic corridors. And most recently, we had the rededication of Little Saigon, and one of the group of store owners brought up the idea of bringing an evening bazaar, an evening nightlife to be able to help those businesses that are in sometimes commuter neighborhoods that are gone, but using art as a way to attract more clientele and foot traffic. So I'd like to just make sure that we take that into account, that we look at diversity throughout the city, particularly in the commercial corridors that maybe don't get as much foot traffic as we could, and make them destination locations.
Okay, are there other members that have any comment? Well, we really do look forward to hearing from you more, both in public session and in private, as we get into the American Relief Act plan investments, as we continue to look for opportunities to grow this vital part of our Sacramento. So thank you for maybe merely whetting the appetite here in terms of what is possible.
Thank you, Mayor. It's a pleasure to serve. It really is. Sacramento has just been really wonderful. It's a great place.
That is great. I'm glad you came. Okay, let us now move to the second discussion item, which is the item 17, which is the continuous review of cannabis policymaking, education, and community outreach. Mr. Oseguera, our city auditor.
All right. Thank you very much, Mayor and members of the City Council. Jorge Oseguera, your city auditor. With me today are Lynn Bashaw and Nathan Lugo, who were primarily responsible for completing this report. The recommendation that is before you is that you pass a motion approving the continuous cannabis monitoring report. The report you are hearing today is a product of the resources that were approved for my office to continuously seek opportunities for improvement for the Office of Cannabis Management and reduce risks to the city. The Cannabis Compliance Auditor continuously monitors and reports on areas of risk through frequent and proactive audits of the Office of Cannabis Management Administration and regulation of cannabis programs. The scope of the review focused on the Office of Cannabis Management's internal policymaking process for developing cannabis regulations in the city of Sacramento and included a review of cannabis industry education and community outreach activities provided during fiscal year 2019-20 and 2020-21. For this project, we compared the city's policymaking practices to a policymaking best practice framework. The framework organizes the process into 5 common sense stages listed on this slide. The first stage identifies the problem and policy need. The second stage considers various policy options. The third activity settles on a policy solution. The fourth puts a policy into practice, and the final stage verifies whether implemented policy met the objectives of the policymakers. The final stage, in our opinion, is a critical stage, as this stage provides the policymakers with the opportunity to confirm the policy's effectiveness and determine if the policy needs to be modified to address any unintended consequences observed during policy implementation. Our first finding focuses on the opportunity to enhance the policymaking process. While the Office of Cannabis Management has developed processes that align with most of the stages in the framework, the current process is informal and does not follow a standard approach. We made 2 recommendations in this finding. The first one is to enhance the current policymaking process by standardizing and documenting the approach to policy formulation and policy implementation. The Office of Cannabis Management is in agreement with this recommendation. The second is to develop a formal process for policy evaluation that considers whether the policy achieved its intended objectives and identifies unintended consequences. The Office of Cannabis Management is in disagreement with this recommendation. In our opinion, given the newness of the legal cannabis industry and its changing regulatory environment, we believe formalizing and documenting a process to confirm that cannabis-related policies meet the objectives and adjust for unintended consequences would be of great value. Formal evaluation of key policy areas is not a foreign concept. The City Council rules and procedures are reviewed and updated on an annual basis. One could also see the benefit of having a formal evaluation process when implementing a policy such as the city's current change in the use of force policy. Formalizing and documenting whether cannabis-related policies met their intended objective would have a tremendous value to confirm, for example, if the core program achieved its goals. Without a formal process, the city would be at greater risk that new cannabis-related policies will fail to meet their intended objective. The second finding focuses on better meeting their stated objective by providing more focused education and increased community outreach activities. As the cannabis industry continues to grow in the city of Sacramento and the regulatory environment changes, the needs for education and community outreach will also change. It will be important for the Office of Cannabis Management to regularly assess whether their education, community outreach, and youth prevention programs meet the city's needs. In the second finding, we highlight that as the result of the 2017 City Council request, the Office of Cannabis Management established a separate account for the community outreach with their cannabis policy enforcement multi-year operating project. As of February of 2021, the account had accumulated $750,000 and only spent $6,764. With teenagers facing increasing mental health challenges, it is important for the Office of Cannabis Management to prioritize its objectives to educate and inform parents and young people about the potential hazards of cannabis use by adolescents and teens. Included in the second finding are 2 recommendations. Number 1 is to proactively assess the educational needs of the local cannabis industry to identify any gaps and provide focused training programs that support business compliance. The second is to increase youth education and community outreach efforts to better meet their stated objectives. The Office of Cannabis Management is in general agreement with both of these recommendations. This concludes our presentation, and we would like to thank the Office of Cannabis Management and the City Attorney's Office for their help and cooperation during this engagement. We are available to answer any questions should you have any.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. City Auditor. Well, a simple and non-controversial subject here, cannabis. You've given us a lot of things to think about here. Do we have public testimony on the item?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I have 3 callers.
All right, let's hear from the callers.
May I have my first caller, please? Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. This is Malachi Amen, Director of the Institute for More. We really appreciate this auditor's report, and it really validates what we've been saying for over 2 years with respect to a need to kind of move deeper into conversation with stakeholders who have been impacted by Sacramento's racialized enforcement of the war on drugs. We have yet to receive an official apology from the city with respect to those who've been murdered by the police for marijuana, those who have been trapped in generational poverty. The city began its implementation of cannabis policy with providing licenses to general operators before completing a social equity analysis and before identifying those who were impacted. And now we're having trouble with the city being intentional about achieving its 50% goal of all licenses for those communities that have been impacted pursuant to the study. And so, we think that it's important to continue this continuous monitoring and evaluation, as well as look at the overarching goals of the Office of Cannabis Management's cannabis programs. We see regulated on page 7 of 25 of this report. We see regulated, safe, diverse, economically healthy. But the reality is that nowhere in these overarching goals is equity, racial and health equity, a priority in the overarching goals of the city's cannabis program. And so it compared with what we're seeing with the implementation of CORE, this is a serious concern. We need to have a public hearing, and we certainly should have.
Thank you for your comments. Your time is complete. Will you make your final comment, please?
We need to have a public hearing, and we certainly need to make sure that there is continuous improvement here.
Thank you for your comments. Next caller, please. Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
Good afternoon, City Mayor and City Council members. My name is Raquel Kemp. I am the co-chair for Institute for More, and I am also a core graduate. I'm calling in to urge City Council to look at taking a look at how new policies are being proposed. And for example, when we're providing feedback and stakeholders calls, a lot of times in our stakeholder meetings, but at the end of the call, sometimes if it's like a thing that we're providing feedback in, like a workshop or something like that, and they're getting our feedback and they're documenting it, let's say, for example, like the grant, at the end, it's like, and this isn't the, at the end, it's kind of open and ambiguous, and it's open to self-interpretation. And I feel like it needs to be clear. There should be more polls taken during stakeholders calls to avoid any sort of manipulation and or that doesn't really meet the best interest of the majority of the people. And so addressing those things and those concerns to kind of close that door and make sure that that the voices are being heard of all stakeholders and not just a minority group that have a common self-interest is being taken into consideration. And so I just want to urge you guys to take a look at that as well. So that way we can make sure that there's fair policy across the board that will help CORE as a whole and help push the goals that you guys have agreed to, which is the 50%. And and I do continue to urge you guys.
Thank you for your comments. Your time is complete. Will you make your final comment, please?
Thank you for your time, and thank you for your support. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you for your comments. Next caller, please. Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
Good afternoon, council. Good afternoon, mayor. Thank you all for taking this time to hear us out, hear our voices in regards to this matter. Of course, non-controversial per usual, but my name is Mike Snell. I'm representing District 4 with support of Katie Valenzuela, Councilmember Valenzuela, and my partner is John Long through SkyCloud. And as far as our experience, we just need as much support. For sure, I'm in agreement with Mr. Malachi in regards to a public hearing. We have a great opportunity here in front of us to get this done, get this dialed in right for everyone, coming into this industry after us and going forward. And it's important that we work closely, with the city authorities that'll be implementing all the law and ledge going forward. It's important that we work closely. It's important that, especially with CORE, you guys are involved and before any new policies implemented, there's some sort of liaison process, before that's all final embedded. We need permanent funding. We need additional resources. We're right there. We are right there at getting this right. We just have a few more things to, install and in place. And, we're on course to, being a prime example for the nation. And this is speaking from someone who's a veteran, who's been in this fight for the past, 6 years. I'm thankful to have this opportunity to, open a storefront in the, the lovely city of Sacramento, and be a staple in this community to, support any local measures as far as, supporting, development for homeless, low income, also,
Thank you for your comments. Your time is complete. Will you make your final comment, please?
My final comment is, we're all in this to do this the right way as a community, without corporate interest, and we want to uplift our communities the best way we can, working with you guys.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Mayor, I have no more
Thank you.
comments.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Thank you to the members of the public. Is this an action item here? Okay.
Yes, it
Yes.
is.
It is. Okay, Councilmember Guerra?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, the city auditor, for this. I looked at the responses from the city, the staff on this, and I do acknowledge that this is something. One of these requests is something that we don't ask other departments, but it is something we have been doing as through the Budget and Audit Committee, where we've developed processes and then requested items to come back in 6 months or 7 months and had continuous improvement. So I don't see a harm in creating a formalized process to review policy to help us guide us in a new area. The other key thing here is I do, one of the concerns has been is that we have Davina and Zara are basically, that's the team right now, and they do great work in making sure that we're moving forward. And one of the challenges has been is that it's only them. So on the issue of youth outreach and making sure that we create a good program there, and the fact that we had COVID for a year has allowed us this opportunity where we have a good amount of funds that have accumulated that we can, I think, develop a good way of doing a lot of the youth education prevention outreach. The best way I think that can be accomplished is by not reinventing the wheel and making sure we're working with the youth advocates and the health organizations that are already in this space and focused in this area. So what I'd like to do, Mr. Mayor, and I do believe this is not a non-controversial item, is move to accept the auditor's report and direct staff to work with youth advocates and health organizations to help inform the staff on the need for youth cannabis youth education prevention. And based on that assessment of the community need, that the staff would draft an RFP to address the youth needs there.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and second that, Mayor,
Okay, very good.
and call for a vote.
Let's call the roll, please.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Ashby?
Yes.
Councilmember Laloe?
Aye.
Councilmember Harris?
Aye.
Councilmember Valenzuela?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Chenier?
Aye.
Councilmember Guerra?
Aye.
Councilmember Jennings?
Aye.
Councilmember Vang?
Yes.
And Mayor Steinberg?
Yes, that passes. All right, thank you very much. We move now to our last discussion item of the day, and this is the middle-income housing proposal and whether or not the city council should enter into a joint powers authority or agreement regarding two specific projects. We do have the representatives from the Joint Powers Authority on Zoom, and I know we have SHRA who prepared the report, and I know I have some initial questions here of the city attorney and the city treasurer, so I would ask them to please stay on the line here, but why don't we begin with the staff presentation?
Okay, Mayor. Good afternoon, Lachelle Dozier, Executive Director of SHRA. SHRA was asked to review the Joint Powers Agreement with the California Municipal Finance Authority, or CMFA, Special Finance Agency, to create a middle-income housing program, which we presented to the City Council on May 11. At that time, the City Council directed the City Treasurer, the City Attorney, and SHRA to further review the CMFA proposal and provide recommendations. SHRA was also directed to reach out to the Sacramento Housing Alliance to get their feedback. The information provided in this report contains those observations. As a reminder, moderate income housing programs have been developed and marketed by three entities: CMFA, the California Community Housing Agency, and the California Statewide Communities Development Authority. The basic mechanics of these programs involves the city becoming a non-voting member of a JPA. The JPA structure allows for the issuance of tax-exempt public purpose bonds. These bonds are used to purchase multifamily properties, and because they are government-owned, they are not subject to property taxes. This program is designed to serve households from 80% of area median income, or AMI, up to 120% AMI. The property tax exemption is the key to enabling income-restricted units without any additional funding. The affordability period is between 15 to 30 years based on when the property is sold. At year 15, the city has the right of first refusal to purchase the property for the amount of debt on it. If bondholders foreclose on the property, this right is lost. If the city declines to exercise the option by year 30, the JPA must sell the property, pay off existing debt, and distribute any net sales proceeds remaining to taxing entities. It should be noted that this is a new program. CMFA has proposed to form a JPA with the city to acquire two recently constructed buildings, H16 located at 731 16th Street and the Eleanor Apartments located at 501 16th Street. Each building has 95 units consisting of studios, ones, and two-bedroom units. H16 is currently leased and the Eleanor is vacant and awaiting its certificate of occupancy. HRNA advisors have spent a great deal of time analyzing these types of JPAs and agreements with other cities in California and has agreed to be available for today's City Council meeting. Kate Owens from HRNA is on the line today with us and is available to answer any questions you may have. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to the City Treasurer, John Colville, to discuss any observations that he would like to add.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dozier. I want to begin with Mr. Colville by asking him a question and then, of course, allow him to make his presentation. you wrote an addendum to the report in which you expressed some concerns about some particulars of the program. Are you okay today with the city council moving forward so that those issues can be negotiated and clarified?
Mr. Mayor, good afternoon, members of the council. I certainly am. That is in my recommendation. I think a lot of my concerns, and Ben addressed them in his additional correspondence that was sent to the council.
Who's Ben?
Ben Barker from CMFA. My recommendation is, given this crisis of housing in the city, that we need to do anything and everything to try to mitigate some of it. And I think a lot of the concerns can be mitigated through negotiations with CMFA and also a good public benefit agreement. I'm confident that this is an opportunity that should be analyzed further. Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Is Susanna Alcala on the line?
I am, Mayor.
And City Attorney, I would ask you the same question. You expressed some concerns about risk. Are you okay moving forward today so long as there is time to negotiate the details and the particulars of the JPA?
Mayor, my response in the addendum to the report was consistent with the response I previously gave to this council and in response to a request, I believe, from Council Member Bang or somebody with regards to the risk. I said that there is a low risk. That's not to say there's no risk, but it is low risk. Once we have an actual agreement to look at, we'll be better able to work with the Treasurer's Office and SHRA on any points that we would recommend. I do want to, so the answer, Mayor, is that as with anything, our office advises you if there's any risk, there's a low risk, but certainly nothing that I would be cautioning the council against moving forward. I do want to point out, I did review the CFMA response to the staff report, and I do not disagree with their comments on the liability issues they addressed. However, I was referring to the tort liability. And so our recommendation remains consistent, which is we would recommend that there be a provision in any agreement that would indemnify the city. Government tort liability is very different from the general liability they refer to.
And there is still time to negotiate that, even if the council says yes today, to negotiate that so that it can come back to the council for final approval, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Do we have public testimony on the item?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
How many?
I have 2 callers.
Okay, let's go.
Thank you. May I have a caller, please? Welcome to the meeting. You have 2 minutes to address the council.
Good afternoon. I'm William Paveo, Council District 4, representing the Sacramento Housing Alliance. SHA sent a letter to each council member listing several serious concerns regarding the public benefit to be derived from the CMFA proposal and associated proposed property tax loss. We spoke with CMFA's Ben Barker and now see that our concerns can't be resolved without more information, and that information cannot be obtained without CMFA and the sponsor being viable potential buyers of the 2 subject properties. In order for CMFA and the sponsor to negotiate with the seller and access project information, the city must enter into the proposed joint powers agreement. SHA therefore supports the city forming the JPA with CMFA in order to more fully understand the proposed project and work on a public benefits agreement that benefits the city and its residents. We strongly urge an independent third-party analysis, as was done, for example, by the city of Long Beach. Finally, if the concerns of SHA's letter are not ultimately addressed, we may still recommend against this particular proposal. CMFA has stated their interest in working with SHA to determine any public benefit to be derived in exchange for the foregone property taxes. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Mayor, I have no more callers.
Very good. I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, but I'm going to, if it's it's okay, just make a very brief comment. It's a repeat of what I said earlier. I know this is complicated, and I know that there is more work to be done to ensure that the city is not at risk. We've heard from our city attorney that that there is time to negotiate that and make sure that what gets brought back to us for final approval protects the city. We've heard essentially the same thing from the city treasurer. So I just want to make a simple observation, because sometimes the complications and the nuances, which are important, obscure the larger truth. CMFA has said that they are willing to negotiate with the city, not a third split in terms of affordability, but 40% for households of 61 to 80% AMI, 20% 81 to 100, and another 40% for the remainder. So what does that mean? That means that 76 units out of the 190, 40%, will be contractually obligated when the city attorney eventually signs off, contractually obligated to people of low income, 61 to 80. And then another 20% will be contractually obligated to households at 81 to 100. Still people in great need, especially if we're talking about living in the central city. That's 114 units. 114 units at a cost to the city, if I remember the estimate last time, of about $160,000 a year. I don't think we can build relatively low and or moderate income housing at that price point. And so I think we are not making a citywide blanket policy. We're trying something new and creative. And I think it is worthy to move forward. Councilmember Valenzuela.
Thank you, Mayor. And I couldn't agree with you more when it comes to, I think we've made this really complicated. So, this is not, I want to boil things down a little bit. So for me, this is not a new entity. We're a member of it now. They've done many projects in our region and many projects with developers in our region without any compliance issues. And so this isn't a stranger to us. This is a friend, someone we've done work with for a while. And this is a new idea and there are details to be worked out. But one thing that I did here is I did some math, which is not my strong suit. So I admit there may be a couple errors here, but when I did the math on what the current breakdown of the buildings are in the staff report, which is lower than what you just outlined, Mary, what you just outlined would increase the number of 80% units. But if you just boil down, look at the top range of what the rents would be now, and then look at what the rents would be after the agreement. So you calculate that subsidy, essentially what we're getting for that, just for the 80% and 100% AMI units, it is over $700,000 a year in subsidy. It's over $700,000 a year in rent subsidies. So when you look at a property tax loss of $656,000, of which we'd only get a fraction, as the mayor mentioned, just over $100,000, we are getting far and above what we would be able to pay for if we kept the property taxes as they were, kept the buildings as they were, and tried to use that 100,000 and change to do something comparable. And the opportunity cost of not trying to figure out if this works, because if it does work, it could open up a whole new financing scheme for not just us, but for other cities around the state. It feels like we're caught in that, people don't want to be first. Anaheim's put their toe in the water. And I think this is a really low risk proposition for us, as the city attorney just said. And we're also getting a lower rent cap on all of the units than we currently have in local and state law. So this is a benefit that I feel like 700,000 just barely starts to quantify in terms of what we get for this project and versus what we are losing, quote unquote, if you were just looking at the straight cost benefit. And I know the treasurer and I talked about, we want to make sure that what we're losing is commensurate to what we're getting. And I think in my mind, the math on this just works out. So, and in the end, something that I think is overlooked that I was actually just reminded of by my staff today, in the end, what we have are two buildings that are probably going to appreciate in value significantly over the next 15 years that we are going to get to decide what they do with, right? And if they sell and we get that money back, I mean, that's an investment that we're making, just like any other real estate transaction that could provide some really great opportunities for us in the next 15 years. And of course, I support increasing the number of units, and I think it's fine, if SHRA wants annual compliance reports to get submitted by CMFA. I mean, I don't expect there to be any problems, but if that step feels better, and I'm also fine with the idea that this would come back to council before it's all finalized, that we look at the agreement, we look at the joint JPA together one more time before everything was go. But I'd like to direct staff to work on this and come back as soon as possible with the final JPA and project agreement. And I have a question, Mayor, or maybe City Attorney or Clerk. Is this a motion that we need to make? Because I saw this was receive and provide guidance in the notice, and so I don't know if we're doing a motion or if I should just
I think
say that.
It's to provide direction, and I would ask for direction in the form of a motion. And I think that putting a timeline on the best efforts to try to finalize the negotiations is appropriate. I was thinking, in the next couple of weeks. That's what
I was going to ask Ben, because I know we're really lucky. In fact, I've got to say, because we have a developer right now who's basically like waiting on us and could sell these at market rate and be done with it, but wants to try this out. So Ben, could you talk to us a little bit about the timeline that we're looking at moving forward and what the best time frame would be, giving us the most time we can to work out the details, but bringing it back in time to not miss out on the opportunity here?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for having me once again. Thank you, Honorable Mayor and council members. First, I'd like to say CMFA, thank you guys for the opportunity to move forward and looking at this project. And again, CMFA is the largest affordable housing issuer in the state of California. We're all about housing. 90% of our business is affordable housing. This most recent round at SIDLAC, we turned in almost another 70 applications, which is more than the entire state combined. So the CMFA is primarily affordable housing, and that's what we do day in and day out. A lot of this project comes down to simple math. How much can we subsidize and how much can we do? And again, if I could have everyone move in for free, I would do it, but it comes down to math here. So I think our track record speaks for themselves, that we care about affordable housing and providing that across the entire state. 330 plus members, we've done 1,000 plus deals, and we look to work with the city. I don't feel at all that this is a negotiation process. I would hope to be able just to continue to work with the city to be able to provide the best affordable housing or essential housing project that can be provided. I don't think this needs to be a long negotiation. Luckily, we have a partner here that is working with us, and I'm hoping they continue to work with us and to be able to work with the city to get the terms under the current documents completed. I would think within a couple of weeks at the most, we could have the documents turned around. I submitted again, I think almost 6 times now, the documents to the city. So I would hope that they could start with the documents we've sent over, send us back any comments. CMFA is waiting. I'll work on it this afternoon if the city has comments back on the documents we've already sent over.
Okay, thank you, Ben. So I will turn my direction into a motion, Mayor, and I think June 29th is our last meeting before we go to summer recess. So I would like to move that we direct staff to work with CMFA and the project developer to come back to us with the sub-JPA and project agreement by June 29th. And for my colleagues who might still have questions, I think a lot, as was mentioned, a lot of this will get worked out in the project agreement phase and in the actual steps that are going to be taken in the next couple of weeks. And so you will get another chance to vote before we finalize everything. But this step will enable us hopefully to answer a lot more of the outstanding questions that have been named today. So that is my motion, Mayor, to come back by June.
That is the motion. And it doesn't have to be part of the motion, but I would just like to say for the record, Mr. Barker, if you can also work with the Housing Alliance as well. Sacramento Housing Alliance.
I'll second that motion, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, that's been seconded. Councilman Guetta, you're up next.
Great. Well, I think, I'll just, from what the comments from our last meeting, I think we could have just done this in the last meeting as well. It's a great opportunity. I think for us, we can learn about it. The biggest gain is if this is a very successful project, this could be a good tool in areas that we have challenges in getting more development done. And particularly that's in our older infrastructure, older commercial corridors, areas like District 2, District 6, areas that could use an opportunity for more middle income housing and mixed income housing. Areas like Northgate, and Fruit Ridge as well. So I think there's a lot of wins here. And there's risk every time we try to do something. But what we heard from our city treasurer and our city attorney, even last time, is that these are things that can be managed as we go through the process. So I'm excited to learn more about this as we move forward. I think we should be asking the questions and how as we're moving forward, this could work in other parts of the city. Maybe it's easier to work for this in the central city, but what I'd like to see is could this help in some of our areas, such as Stockton Boulevard? I'll close by saying that Councilmember Chenier and I took a lot of folks to try to incentivize folks to come and look at some of these vacant lots on Stockton Boulevard. And many saw the potential, but still saw a lot of high risk. So could this be another tool we could use in the tool chest? And our city treasurer said it best. We have to try everything and anything to try to address our housing issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Ben, I just want to say that I read your responses to the queries of the council, and I appreciate the thoroughness of the responses. I do think that I was not completely clear on an answer about the tort liabilities of the city. So if you could please address that, that would be fantastic. Councilmember Valenzuela, I was going to provide direction to also include a term sheet spelling out the entire deal, the costs and the community benefits and all of that. And I'm wondering if you are willing to accept that as direction in your motion, along with the project agreement.
Yes, Ben, is that possible to have done by then? Okay, then yes, I'm happy to add that.
Well, that being said, I'm certainly willing to roll the dice on this. I do think it is low risk. I think it has real potential benefits for the city, and I'm happy to move forward with it. So I'll be in support. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Laloe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I think this is going to be a great project for us. But I do have just a few questions. Was it your office that kind of picked this site and had the conversation with the developer? Who initiated this conversation?
Mr. Barker?
So the developer and I were introduced through a mutual friend, and with the CMFA has been looking at this kind of an overall background. This program, while is somewhat new to California, it's been around for about 50 years throughout the country. California really started ramping up about 3 years ago. The CMFA started looking at this opportunity probably about two plus years ago. And before we really stepped into this opportunity, we worked with the state treasurer and went through and vetted the program, made sure that the CMFA was comfortable with stepping into this program. Again, CMFA has done over 1,000 plus deals. We have almost zero defaults. We're not looking to get into projects that have potentials to defaults. And we went through and vetted this with the treasurer's program, the executive director of CIDLAC and TCAC at the time. And they had said, you should look at Sacramento as one of the first opportunities. So about a year ago, we started speaking with Satiri about his projects. And so I believe it was last March, the introduction was made. And we started from there and started trying to work towards the purchase of 2 of his buildings. And again, being ultra sensitive to the precious allocation that we have with CIDLAC and TCAC, and to be able to underwrite a deal that doesn't take anything away from the ultra low affordable housing that we're all accustomed to. So this is a kind of a matter of math and public policy of getting something that works for everybody, but we are constrained by math and not using any of those resources that are set aside for the low income housing projects.
So in your portfolio, do you have sites that are similar to what we're anticipating getting done in Sacramento that are in lower income areas versus a downtown, which is a very high, fast renting environment?
Well, so just to be clear, since the broader public and market saw that the CMFA has been speaking with Sacramento, I have been kind of warding off calls and not taking calls for additional projects in the city of Sacramento until we had some kind of certainty of execution. I didn't want to give anybody false hopes that anyone can just kind of come to town and start buying up buildings or anything like that. I wanted to make sure that everybody, the city council, city staff, and all the interested parties were comfortable with what we were proposing and then moving forward. Again, I've probably taken 10 to 15 calls about specific projects in the city of Sacramento, but have not gone down the underwriting path really with most of those, because you need to have certainty of execution, and I don't want to give people false hope on that. But in addition to that, CMFA has completed projects in other cities like what you're referring to, just not in Sacramento, obviously.
Okay. So we can look forward to your organization being involved in areas that have been predominantly low-income housing, but these areas desperately need that middle-income housing. Is that something that would fit your portfolio and future projects?
Yes, sir. I can promise that as soon as this meeting's over, if the city council moves forward, people will start calling and people will start looking in Sacramento. So obviously it's best to be very careful with the projects that are being proposed and reviewed very thoroughly. So I know of a number of projects they would like to come forward in multiple of the districts right now.
Great. Well, I really appreciate your time. I think this is going to be an exciting project once we find out all the details. If you get a chance, and this is not any mandatory thing, if you have a project that fits what I just explained, kind of low-income housing, and then you guys went in and supported a middle-income housing in a different city or different environment. If you could, again, if not, if you can, you can. But if you can send me a copy of that so I can just look at the numbers and kind of visit some of the areas that my colleague, Councilmember Guerrero, even talked about, I would greatly appreciate it.
I'd love to help facilitate that.
Thank you very much.
Okay. If there's no further testimony, Ms. Dozier, did you want to conclude?
I think that we do need to just talk about the timeline. If you're referring to coming back on the 28th, that's 2 weeks. And I know that both Susanna and John and I, as we were working on this, were trying to determine exactly how much time it would take for the review of the documents. And yes, Ben has sent over those documents, but those documents are not specific to what we have been discussing here today. Those have been more of just the general draft documents. Susanna, do you?
It's 3 weeks, by the way. 3 weeks from today.
Mm-hmm. So that's June 29th?
29th is 3 weeks from today.
I'm just checking with the lawyer right now to see, because I know what the lawyer already has on their plate, and I just want to make sure that I'm absolutely clear with this council. We will do our best to make this a priority and work on it, but I will do our best, but that's a short time frame. And it isn't that I'm overcomplicating anything. That's just us doing our job.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, obviously, we're asking you to please do your very best, and that's all we can ask. And know you will, as the treasurer, as will SHRA, to try to get this back to us by the 29th. But we will.
Especially if it's important to the council that we create a project that then could be a blueprint for others, and that way it's important to make sure we get it right for you guys the first time.
What I think the council is saying is that we want to be creative here in experimenting with different models, because the model we have is wonderful. The product is great when it comes to what our SHRA and our nonprofit developers do. The issue is, we know it, it's obvious. It's cost and it's time. And so we're just legitimately looking for various ways. It's like the tiny home discussion, different, but that we're trying to find different ways we can meet the incredible demand out there. And always have to assess the cost of doing so versus the benefit, which is what we're trying to do here. And so that's, I think, the motive. I know it's the motive. And to provide more affordability for all the city, but in this case, especially downtown, where young people and people of all ages, but people coming to the city often can't consider living in the downtown or the midtown. We want to try to create something better than that together.
Mayor,
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt, but I'd like to ask Ben one more question, if I might.
of course.
So Ben, assuming this deal consummates, there will be tremendous competition for these units. It's not a huge number. There's an immense demand for affordability downtown. What would be the management prospect to decide who gets into these units?
So that's kind of the wonderful thing about this program is the city could really, stipulate if they have a preference, if they want city employees, if they want first responders, if they want teachers. There's a lot of different things that the city could say is we have a priority in these type of groups to fill these units. Like you said, I think the units will be taken very quickly, and we will fill the first, the lowest bucket of affordability first, and then work our way up from there. But the affordability is the key thing to making sure we get those buckets. But there can be, city has other priorities that could be adjusted.
Is CMFA the managing entity?
CMFA is the owner of the project.
And then who manages?
So there's FPI, there's a few things that the city can decide on that. That there's a project sponsor, there's an asset manager and a property manager. I believe FPI is currently the project manager or the asset manager of the project.
And who would be the property manager?
The project sponsor or the property manager would be HomeFed. They are a large developer that does affordable and market rate. The CMFA has partnered with this group because they do ground up development. They've done a lot of projects out in the Sacramento County, as well as throughout California. So they have a really in-depth experience from doing the financing from dirt, sewer, power, utilities, to building out schools, libraries, and public parks, as well as the apartment projects and single-family housing programs.
So the takeaway here is that the city council should be thinking about whether or not we have priorities in terms of who would live in these properties.
Right, it's for the city to decide, and that would be through the public benefit agreement, and I think that could be relayed through SHRA. And if there's priorities, some cities have said they wanted a small set aside for seniors. Other cities have said they wanted a large set aside for first responders. They wanted the police to live in their downtown area. That's really for the city to decide, not for me.
Yeah, I get it. All community benefits and something to think about. All right, thank you, Ben. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Harris. Okay, so we're asking you just do your best to meet the time deadline, but we're all colleagues, and we will maybe give us status report here as the week progresses. Let's try to get this done before the recess, please. All right, let's call the roll on the item.
Mayor Pro Tem Ashby?
No.
Councilmember Laloe?
Yes.
Councilmember Harris?
Aye.
Councilmember Valenzuela?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Chenier?
Aye.
Councilmember Guerra?
Aye.
Councilmember Jennings?
Aye.
Councilmember Vang?
Yes.
And Mayor Steinberg?
Yes, that passes 8-1. Thank you all very much. All right, that completes the agenda, the formal agenda for today. Are there council ideas and questions? Council ideas and questions. I see two, Councilmember Valenzuela and Vice Mayor Chenier.
Well, speaking of creative housing solutions, our office met with Kevin Donnelly and Bill Blake this week. This is the same team that built the Sophia. They're looking at a 110-unit affordable housing, co-housing project in the district, which is exciting and exactly the type of housing we'd need. They are looking at a new way to try to fund these projects. And so one thing I'd like to direct staff on is if they could work with Kevin and Bill to see if a credit tenant lease with the city, which is also known as a CTL, is something we could participate in and potentially explore funding to help them close financing gaps on that project. So that would be my direction to staff on that item. And then I had a quick second item, which is was alluded to on the earlier consent calendar. That, as we all know, the public health orders is set to expire on June 15th. We don't really know what the exact parameters of that will be. But one thing that Bridget Dean's met with me about, and I don't know if she's met with others, is her concern that we will just start resuming relocation of encampments as we did before the public health order. There's, I believe, a die-in happening in front of our city hall from health professionals who've written a letter asking us to consider not reinstituting that practice. And I think when we do this master plan process, and we're really looking for spaces for everyone, we want that to play out. We want to honor that process and not just start moving people before we get a chance to have a place for them to move, because moving people just move people to another spot where they're going to have probably different challenges and different interactions with folks. I just had a camp get relocated near my district by somebody who wasn't the city, and all they did was move in front of a business that was a block away from the place that they were before because they didn't have any place to go. So I really, really hope that we can have a conversation soon about what our practice will be as a city and once the public health order lifts, and whether it's in closed session or open session. That would be my request, Mayor and City Manager, that we have that discussion at some point in the near future.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll do so. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. As you know, and my colleagues know, my office put together a number of sessions with the business community to talk about what happens and how do we support reopening of the economy here in Sacramento. I'd like to request time on the agenda, either on the 29th or our first meeting back, but preceding our discussion of ARP, so that the business community that we worked with can come and present their recommendations. So I just want to make sure that in.
You and I have talked a little bit about this. We'll make sure that that is agendized. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Laloe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess this is more for City Manager. I'd like to see if we can have an item pushed forward to Law and Ledge regarding our the homeless community. As majority, actually, as all of you know, we had some major fires over the weekend, and there's some concern as far as some of the encampments close to parks, creeks, and rivers. So I was kind of hoping if Howard can create an ordinance and have it in front of the Law and Ledge for hearing.
Yeah.
Moment of silence.
Go ahead, Ms. Wilson. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. We will review this with the appropriate departments and get back to you and see what we can do in the near term.
Yeah, this is a very worrisome issue. And, you know, it speaks obviously to the state of the parkway. It speaks to public safety, but it also speaks to the importance of us doing what we're doing, which is following through on this work to site more appropriate places for people who are unsheltered to live, and to do so to scale. And women and children, yes, first, but also the men, because look at the impact of of society not driving to bring more people indoors, or at least to safe camping and safe ground. And that's what we have the opportunity to do with all this new money and with our master siting plan. It's ultimately the answer. All right, is there public testimony on items not on the agenda?
No, I have no callers.
All right. Members, there is a Budget and Audit Committee meeting at 4 o'clock, but the City Council for June the 8th here is adjourned. Thank you very much.